Welcome back to the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today's lucky viewers all have the opportunity to win a significantly greater chance of scoring well on their rhetorical analysis essays when taking their AP Lang exams. But any willing participant will have to press the like and subscribe button right below this video in order to be eligible.
That's right, folks.
Believe it or not, I'm heavily involved in many online forums and chats across a multitude of platforms. And one of the most consistent discussions I find taking place around the digital universe focuses on the writing of thesis statements for rhetorical analysis essays, particularly for exam day responses. The whole conversation seems to be rather polarizing, with one mob suggesting that students should not only list an author's rhetorical choices in their thesis statements, but the student should list out 3 rhetorical choices. And the other mob highlights how listing the choices, especially 3, promotes a canned and formulaic 5-paragraph essay that is the bane of every English teacher's existence. So, this particular rowdy bunch typically champions what is called providing an open thesis in response to the rhetorical analysis task. And such a thesis would not explicitly list a writer's choices, but rather it would only explicitly address the author's message and purpose. Writing a thesis in this form will then allow for a student to write about whatever choices that he or she would like, unfettered by the constraints of the choices that the stringy traditionalists list in their thesis statements. The open thesis side also argues that requiring students to produce a thesis in such a manner better prepares students for college-level writing and instruction, which is a really good point.
He's got a point.
I didn't write many 5-paragraph essays in college, except for when I wrote my timed exams. Well, in just a few moments, I'm going to pull back the curtain by providing you with as many rhetorical analysis thesis templates I can that will offer you multiple ways to establish firm lines of reasoning for your rhetorical analysis essays. And I'll provide you with both open and closed thesis templates that you can manipulate to your liking so you can appease your teacher in whichever mob that he or she belongs to. Before I offer these thesis templates and examples, I just want to cover some important considerations. First, if you didn't know, a thesis is a sentence or a group of sentences that is meant to guide a whole essay. A strong thesis typically projects a writer's line of reasoning. That is, if someone reads your thesis, your audience should be able to know where your paper will go if he or she were to continue reading it. Second, these templates are going to become increasingly more complex as we go throughout the video. So, if you're struggling with writing rhetorical analysis thesis statements right now, you'll probably want to start with one of the first thesis templates that I show. Third, I'd like to reiterate I'm going to offer closed and open thesis statements. Fourth, templates are exactly that. Templates, guides. They're basic models and frames that direct you to include the most important parts of what is needed to organize your thinking and your writing. If you want to deviate from the templates in your own style, as long as your thesis communicates what you're trying to say clearly, I'm going to encourage you to do so. I don't want you to think that what I'm presenting here is the only way to do things. I'm just giving you a way to do things. And finally, all of my thesis templates are going to be in response to the 2015 released AP Exam Question 2 rhetorical analysis prompt about an article by Cesar Chavez. This way, they will mesh well with the other writing rhetorical analysis videos that I've already made. If you've seen my other videos in the Garden of English rhetorical analysis playlist, you'll already be familiar with this prompt and reading. But if you have never seen the prompt or read the reading, it's linked in the description right below. It's right under the link where you can grab some Garden of English merch like this. Now that I've covered everything, let's look at rhetorical analysis thesis template number 1 that's about to pop up on your screen. Cool. This is a closed thesis template. This means that the template is restrictive and will force you to operate within the parameters of discussing only the 3 mentioned rhetorical choices and how they convey the author's message while you write your essay. This thesis also requires you to include what the audience of the passage is supposed to understand after reading the piece. Now, in this particular video, I don't have the time to go into detail about the difference between rhetorical choices and rhetorical devices. But if you want to learn more about this, you can in Unit 2 of my comprehensive exam prep study guide that's linked in the description below the video. This guide goes through all of the content for the entire AP Lang course and is basically better than any test prep book that you could get for this class. It also includes materials that are fully aligned with the AP US History units. The guide is meant to help you earn a 5 on your exam and an A in your AP Lang class. Okay, now that you know that, and you've seen the first thesis template, let's look at a model thesis that follows template 1 in response to the Chavez prompt. In his article for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez, a labor rights activist, exemplifies a civil rights icon, contrasts the outcomes of violence with nonviolence, and offers an empowering solution for the lower class. These choices highlight the power and effectiveness of nonviolent protest. I want you to notice a few things. First, I didn't include a formal title in my thesis. That's okay, but I did give the reading an informal title by calling it an article for a religious magazine. Second, I moved the section for the contextual information in the thesis template to after Chavez's name. Both of these changes are perfectly acceptable to do. According to the College Board's exam scoring rubric, this thesis would absolutely earn the thesis point because it clearly analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices when it mentions how Chavez exemplifies, contrasts, and offers. It also does more than restate or rephrase the prompt because it responds to it when it identifies what Chavez's message about nonviolence is, that nonviolent protest is powerful and effective. Okay, so let's take this template and modify it so that it will produce an open thesis. Here is thesis template number 2, the open version. Did you notice what the difference is in this particular thesis template? The first sentence is meant to describe the context and/or the exigence of the reading and provide information about the author. On exam day, you can find a decent amount of this information from the prompt itself. I also encouraged you to include the word chose in some way in this sentence because I wanted to provide you with the opportunity for you to earn the thesis point even if you don't list out rhetorical choices. And the second sentence is meant to include the specifics about the genre of the piece, the author's name, and the author's message. So, a thesis modeled after this template would read like this. Cesar Chavez was a labor rights activist and civil rights leader who chose to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. Throughout the article he wrote for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez highlights the power and effectiveness of nonviolent protest. Although this particular thesis does rephrase some information taken from the prompt, it also goes past what the prompt is provided because it articulates Chavez's message that nonviolent protest is powerful and effective. This is an open thesis because it doesn't list out and limit the writer of the essay to only focusing on 3 choices that Chavez makes. And thus, since this thesis conveys an understanding of Chavez's message, the paper that follows could explore any number of rhetorical choices that Chavez makes throughout the piece to convey the power of nonviolence. But here's my warning to you. On test day, though I do think that many readers would award someone who wrote like this with the thesis point, especially because it purposely requires you to put the word chose in one of your sentences. And how could you say a choice isn't present if the word or a variant of it shows up in the thesis itself? You do run the risk of someone not awarding you the thesis point. Do you want to know why?
Yeah, why?
On the scoring rubric, there are scoring notes for readers to consider when awarding points. One of the scoring notes for the thesis point for rhetorical analysis articulates that a thesis will not earn the point if it fails to address the rhetorical choices that a writer of a passage makes. Although this thesis has clearly given more information than what the prompt has provided when it conveys a defensible reading and interpretation of Chavez's article, some readers may choose not to award the point because they don't think that choices are clearly articulated according to what the rubric says.
Know something? No soup for you!
Now, does the fact that the open thesis may not earn the point for all readers make producing an open thesis a bad writing technique for you to learn for high school and beyond?
No.
Will every exam reader deny the thesis point for not listing choices?
Eeny, meeny, miny, no.
Is the College Board trying to turn you into a poor writer as you move on in your educational career?
Yeah, no.
Is it important to know how to write an open thesis to write a well-developed rhetorical analysis that can go well past the typical 5-paragraph essay? And can this particular thesis help guide you into producing a strong line of reasoning throughout your essay centered on Chavez's message?
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
But I owe it to you and everyone watching to know exactly how papers are scored at the reading based on the College Board rubric. There is some risk on exam day if you embrace the open thesis when writing a rhetorical analysis essay.
You're the risk, I'm gonna take it.
It's just the truth. And the risk goes for all open versions that you'll see from here on out in this video, except for the open version of the final template that I offer. One more quick note. There is significantly less risk of not earning the thesis point when producing an open thesis for both the argument and synthesis essays on your AP Lang exams. Those are questions 3 and questions 1 respectively. Also, if you're looking for a free worksheet that has all of the templates and examples that I'm providing in this video, you can know that you'll find it linked in the description right down below. Okay, now that we've seen 2 thesis statements, let's give the templates and examples a bit of a facelift. The last 2 templates focused on clarifying the author's message in the reading. But rhetoric is typically not only about conveying a message. Once a particular audience understands a message, its members are often meant to then do something with that message. In both of my last 2 templates, the audience is hardly mentioned or implied. I could still write a high-scoring essay about Chavez's choices and how they convey the power of nonviolence, but my paper would be better if each time I discussed how the choice conveyed the power of nonviolence, I also included how the choice, along with its message, would have the ability to motivate the reader of the magazine to adopt nonviolent tactics or at least support the farm workers movement and their cause. So, in my next 2 templates, I'm going to explicitly add a place where the audience can be identified, and where I can include what the audience members should presumably do if they've understood the message itself. This information will be added to the end of the second sentence. Here's the next basic template. Now that you've seen the template, here's what an accurate response in relation to the Chavez piece would look like. In his article for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez, a labor rights activist, exemplifies a civil rights icon and contrasts the outcomes of violence with nonviolence. These choices highlight the power and effectiveness of nonviolent protest and ultimately urge magazine readers to embrace nonviolent tactics themselves. This thesis does more than restate and rephrase the prompt. It projects choices to be analyzed. But did you notice how I only included 2 choices in this thesis? Remember how I said that templates can be manipulated? This is such an example. There is a chance that this essay will only be 4 paragraphs long. An intro with a thesis, a paragraph analyzing Chavez's inclusion of a civil rights icon, a paragraph analyzing why Chavez contrasts outcomes of violence and nonviolence, and a conclusion. On exam day, such would be fine. A paper like this still has the potential to score high marks if the thesis is followed only by 2 body paragraphs and doesn't even have a conclusion. But the body paragraphs would have to be well developed. If you want to find more info about how to produce better commentary, you'll want to watch my body paragraphing videos that have thumbnails that look like these. I want to encourage you, though, not to look for shortcuts in getting a good score on your AP exam. Rather, you should really try to produce as much writing as you can in the allotted time to show what you're actually being tested on. Your ability to articulate your critical thinking clearly in an exam environment. I tell my students that on exam day, they should always look to produce a thesis, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. I know that this is a 5-paragraph response, and many people present such as being a bad thing. But I don't know how anyone could potentially write more than that in a time setting when you only have about 40 minutes per essay. Also, like I mentioned, a thesis and 2 well-developed body paragraphs will do the trick as well. And now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Let's take a moment and see what an open thesis template would look like with this added element of purpose. Here's the template. And a response in this form would read like this. Cesar Chavez was a labor rights activist and civil rights leader who chose to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. Throughout the article he wrote for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez highlights the power and effectiveness of nonviolent protest and ultimately urges magazine readers to embrace nonviolent tactics themselves. This works and provides you with that open freedom. Okay, the first 4 templates split the thesis into 2 sentences so that student writers can collect their thoughts and help convey them with interpretive precision. In my next pair of templates, I'm going to add complexity to how I express my thoughts by doing 2 things. First, I'm going to make the thesis 1 correctly punctuated complex sentence that includes all of the elements of the rhetorical situation along with the author's choices. And second, I'm going to add either the word while or the phrase that although to this template when I shift to the message part of the thesis. Doing so will help me convey my complex understandings of the writer's message to his or her audience throughout the passage. Sometimes students get lost in this single sentence complex thesis. If you're this type of student, that's okay. I would just recommend that you use one of the templates that I've mentioned earlier in this video. You could still write essays that meet all of the rubric requirements if guided by any of those. But alright, here's the single sentence template itself. If you've seen my other rhetorical analysis thesis video, this is the primary template you've probably had experience with. A thesis that follows this template would read like this. In his article for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez, a labor rights activist, exemplifies a civil rights icon and offers an empowering solution for the lower class in order to highlight that although individuals may find violence a momentarily effective method for creative change, nonviolent protest is both more powerful and morally superior, ultimately urging the magazine readers to either embrace nonviolent tactics or at least support the cause. Note that I used only 2 choices in this thesis. I did this again to remind you that you only have to analyze multiple choices to score well on exam day. Multiple just means more than one. You should also note how I included the phrase that although after the phrase in order to. In doing so, I address the complexity that Chavez explores in the piece when he recognizes why some individuals may see the need to act violently but should still embrace pacifism. In this version of the thesis, I also include the moral superiority of nonviolence. You'll notice that in producing this model, I was purposefully more precise. Now, here's the template for this particular thesis in its open form. All I did was get rid of the spots for choices and the phrase in order to. I then added an S to the word highlights or showcases. So, a thesis that follows this mold would read like this. In his article for the religious magazine, Cesar Chavez, a labor rights activist, highlights that although individuals may find violence a momentarily effective method for creating change, nonviolent protest is both more powerful and morally superior, ultimately urging the magazine readers to either embrace nonviolent tactics or at least support the cause. That's a really strong open thesis. I do have one more set of thesis templates that could potentially help you work to become even more sophisticated if you use them correctly. But these templates also require a bit more from you. In fact, these are more like guides than actual templates that you can just fill in the blanks for. These guides purposefully situate the speaker in the midst of the rhetorical situation and force you to realize the challenges that the speaker is addressing for the audience. They then force you to articulate the complex message and purpose of the speaker, explore the relationship of those with the other elements of the rhetorical situation, and thoughtfully infer and hypothesize of other ways the speaker could have potentially dealt with the challenge but chose not to. Let me show you the closed thesis guide for this type. It's about to pop up on your screen. And here's how such a closed thesis would read in response to the Chavez prompt. At the end of the civil rights movement, and in the midst of a labor movement of his own, Cesar Chavez faced the challenge of maintaining a peaceful course in the midst of the rising impatience and frustrations of those in the farm workers movement. In his article to a religious organization dedicated to helping those in need, rather than relenting and supporting more aggressive tactics against the growers, Chavez chose to remind those in his movement that although individuals may find violence a momentarily effective method for creating change, nonviolent protest is both more powerful and morally superior. And he does this by referring to a civil rights icon, contrasting the outcomes of violence and nonviolence, and offering an empowering solution to the lower class, ultimately urging his readers to continue to embrace pacifist tactics or at least support the cause. And here's the open version of this thesis phrase. And here's how the open version would read. At the end of the civil rights movement, and in the midst of a labor movement of his own, Cesar Chavez faced the challenge of maintaining a peaceful course in the midst of rising impatience and frustrations of those in the farm workers movement. In his article to a religious organization dedicated to helping those in need, rather than relenting and supporting more aggressive tactics against the growers, Chavez chose to remind those in his movement that although individuals may find violence a momentarily effective method for creating change, nonviolent protest is both more powerful and morally superior, ultimately urging his readers to continue to embrace pacifist tactics or at least support the cause. Now, of all of the open versions of the thesis statement templates that I've provided, I can guarantee that every exam reader would award you the thesis point if you use this final open template. These final templates are not only thorough, but they are sophisticated. But they are also not for everyone. Based on this video, you now have 8 new templates to experiment with and rework. As you use them in your classes and in your practice, I encourage you to share some of your thesis statements in the comments down below so that others can learn from your work and your readings. And once you've mastered your thesis statements, make sure that you also master writing body paragraphs by watching what's about to show up here.